Want to listen to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll call you Comrade Janneh. Let me start with because my paper was distributed, but with a general statement. Egypt, Tunisia, Libya, Morocco are African countries. And it is incorrect to call it an Arab Spring. It is an Afro-Arab Spring. And I think it's very important for these countries to understand their location and the impact of their revolutions also on our continent. Just as many people across the world during the 20th century saw in South Africa a dread synthesis of the varieties of atrocity and corruption that humanity could devise against itself. So too Lebanon, and specifically Beirut, has known sectarian strife, foreign occupation, aggressive war, numerous varieties of open and covert subversion. And this country and its people have above all demonstrated a stubborn capacity for renaissance and renewal, cultural, political, and economic. If I speak to you from South Africa, which learned from other countries as it designed and implemented its own approach to dealing with the legacy of the apartheid past, I speak as much as part of my own, my country's continuing education, rather than as someone with marketable experience looking to teach. As we seek to bring diverse histories of numerous places under a more or less common framework of analysis, we must factor in the peculiarities of each struggle, each crisis, and each path to renewal. Underlying all our efforts, wherever on the planet these may be, then is the common impulse towards democratic accountability and socio-economic reconstruction. Bertolt Brecht struck a helpful note when he wrote, and I quote him, I carry a brick on my shoulder in order that the world may know what my house was like. Brecht captured with suitable intimacy and in concentrated form the themes upon which I am asked to reflect today. Conflicts are never singular, always plural, and the nature of the conflicts involved in the occurrence of atrocities plainly has a lot to do with how we ought to go about addressing the legacies of these conflicts and of these atrocities. The plural nature of conflicts creates a complex set of necessities and equally numerous risks of failure. In the aftermath of every set of atrocities comes an explicit or implicit contest for primacy among its contending legacies or plausible victim groups. Because of the posture of the Nuremberg trials as a clash of sovereign military forces, the question of how victim and perpetrator groups might live together afterwards scarcely arose. If anything, the idea was that Jews could be relocated elsewhere, with all the following consequences that are all too familiar in the Middle East today, with the Palestinians having to pay an inhuman price. The entire question of how Germany came to terms with its own internal legacy of murderous anti-Semitism, as well as violence against communists, gypsies and others, was largely left for the post-war efforts of civil society, as well as a flawed and partial series of criminal trials in German domestic courts during the decade following the war. The percentage of Germans regarding the Nuremberg prosecutions as fair declined from 78% in 1946 to 38% in 1950. In South Africa, where there was no victorious military march, nor any unconditional surrender of an external enemy, the Truth Commission was a mechanism that intended less to punish defeated offenders than to transform national consciousness towards a national consensus on the socio-economic legacy of the past. But then, the very mode by which the Truth Commission proceeded with its work became open to contest within the deliberations of the Truth Commission itself. Much good work was undoubtedly done through the process of the hearings, in which many of the victims of apartheid were heard to voice their pain. And yet, as several commentators have noted, it is fair to say that the Commission did not satisfactorily resolve in its own mind the basic nature of the conflict. With one part of its brain, the TRC seemed to regard apartheid as a crime against humanity, in which a legitimate resistance movement was acting in self-defense. But in other modes, the Commission seemed to adopt a more symmetrical logic in which it detected atrocities on all sides and sought to single out individualized perpetrators of these atrocities. The consequence was that they put us, the resistance movement, practically on the same level as the apartheid regime. The basic nature of the conflict accordingly remained in important respects unresolved. The further question is whether, even had the Commission performed this analysis more sharply, it would or possibly could have meaningfully shifted moral and political attitudes within the country towards a more powerful consensus determined to define and dismantle the apartheid legacy. The intention in South Africa was, I think wisely so, never to foreclose debate or announce a singular truth in this way. But if this is the nature of the conflict, that it is an inherently open-ended and democratic debate, then what was the purpose of the Truth Commission process? One purpose is it did help to identify and stigmatize apartheid as a bad thing. It became a national cliche in the aftermath of South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commission. That nobody could be found who ever supported apartheid. So I don't know who we were fighting. This suspiciously easy and rhetorical national consensus was obviously a mixed blessing. On the one hand, apartheid became finally and firmly indefensible. The excuses such as anti-communism, anti-terrorism, or fears for the health of the economy under democracy were each definitively silenced. A history of educational or economic exclusion was admitted, while the legitimacy of racially defined corrective actions were attacked as new apartheid. Racial privilege in education re-described itself as a concern to preserve a language. A history of the accumulation of racial spoils was admitted, but an untroubled defense of a broad constitutional right of property continued. And it did so without regard to the actual wording of the South African Constitution's property right clause, which in fact deliberately diluted the absolutism of property rights in accordance with the burdens of history by addressing the questions of compensation for expropriation. The current holders of property, having joined in the cleansing national rhetoric of the TRC, and thus having suitably renounced any identification with apartheid, now presented themselves as innocent holders of untainted property rights. As I speak to you now, and I speak to you also as a former minister, we have not yet been able to effect an effective transformation of land ownership, which still resides in the hands of the white minority. While the TRC conducted summary hearings in a thematic fashion regarding the tainted conduct of professions or organized constituencies, medicine, law, judiciary, business, these too were afterwards taken to operate in a purgative and backward-looking sense. Too little of the hearings, discussion, or subsequent report with its recommendations set forward-looking agendas for dealing with identifiable sector legacies. The result was dissipation rather than change-oriented momentum. In the course of yesterday and this morning, we've heard quite a lot about the relationship and the interaction of social justice and development. But I think we were shying away from a fundamental question. Does capitalism as a system have the answers? Can capitalism as a system offer us the necessary solutions? I don't believe it has. We require a profound shift in the way we look at our economies. We require a totally different paradigm, a different socio-economic framework in which the interests, the aspirations of the masses of the people should be paramount. And in this sense, I think one of the things that had been lacking, and I hope our representative of the ILO might take the floor later, has been an absence of any comment about the role of the trade union movement, the role of the labor movement in transition societies or even in developed societies. I do not believe that it is possible to carry out fundamental socio-economic reforms without a powerful, independent trade union movement which will defend the rights and the interests of others. And so in our own discourse, I think we need to place at the center of our thinking the role and place of the trade union movement in our societies. My own understanding of Tunisia, for example, was that the trade union movement played a critical role in mobilizing against the old regime. This brings us to the matter of prevailing social and cultural norms and to the question how and indeed whether at all backward-looking institutions meant to offer up national consensus regarding contested histories can ever achieve what they advertise. Edward Said addressed this theme in his essay Permission to Narrate, which appeared in the Politics of Dispossession, published in 1994, the very year of our own democracy. He wrote, and I quote him, "Facts do not at all speak for themselves, but rather require a socially acceptable narrative to absorb, sustain, and circulate them. And there is a disabling tension in formal investigative approaches to the past, where the implementers believe that the finding of facts can assist them to escape the more controversial assertions of values. We know enough now from harsh experience to conclude that this is not true. This confronts us directly with the next question. Are national commissions a suitable mechanisms for wrestling with legacies of atrocity? Let me say clearly, lest my general drift be misunderstood, that for all its mixed and partial and even perhaps less than enduring impact, the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission undoubtedly performed a valuable function in the context of the early years of political transition, the latter half of the 1990s decades. Of course, you will recall that Afro-pessimists predicted a fate of disintegration for South Africa along so-called ethnic or tribal lines. This didn't happen, which is, I emphasize, not to say that we solved all problems, but that we avoided the Armageddon that was dedicated by many observers in South Africa and abroad. And I'd like you to study our Constitution. We had the opportunity of producing a Constitution much later than most people. It is a Constitution that puts the rights of the citizens center stage. It is a Constitution that limits the powers of the state. It is a Constitution that fundamentally recognizes, defends, and promotes the rights of women. We say in our Constitution that we are duty-bound to build a non-racial, non-sexist, democratic South Africa. This is a constitutional imperative for us. What is the direct consequence of the fact that we had a Truth Commission process? By the academically accepted definition, a Truth Commission is a body that focuses on the past, investigates a pattern of abuses over a period of time, rather than a specific event, is a temporary body with a limited mandate, and after completion of its work, it delivers a report and is officially sanctioned, authorized, or empowered by the state. This was defined by Priscilla Hayner in her book Unspeakable Truths, Facing the Challenges of Truth Commissions. Our Truth Commission had these general features, but also particular ones. Most notably, it was the first to require confession and repentance as a condition of amnesty. It offered not general or blanket amnesty, but rather a highly personalized and accountable form in which acknowledgement by the perpetrator, together with full disclosure, was necessary in order to gain immunity from civil sanction and criminal prosecution. South Africa, after all, faces an enormous task of systematic social reconstruction to undo an intricate and fine-grained set of racial legacies that are hardwired into the public and private aspects of our economy and culture. This is the spirit that Bragg so well captures in that poetic note with which I began and with which I will leave you. I carry a brick on my shoulder in order that the world may know what my house was like. Let us all carry a Palestinian brick on our shoulders. Thank you very much.